All right. Hello, everyone. Happy Earth Day. I want to welcome you to our living room lecture series tonight. And we're very pleased to have with us today Dr. Mark Sutton, and he's presenting the fishing link, a new take on the coastal model. My name is Stephanie Sandoval, and I'm the Public Archaeology Director at the San Diego Archaeological Center. The center is a nonprofit dedicated to the preservation of local archaeological collections. And if you've never been to the center or it's been a while, make sure you come by. I'm so happy to announce tonight that we are reopening finally this Saturday. We're going to have free museum admission as well as a book sale and spring bazaar going on. So make sure you stop by this weekend, Saturday, 10 to 2. If you visit our website, you can find more information on our reopening and the sale this weekend, membership options, upcoming events. Our next living room lecture is on Thursday, May 13th, Hominids, Hyenas, and Lions, Zooarchaeological Evidence for Meat Eating by Oldowan Hominids at Kandjira, South Kenya by Dr. Jennifer Parkinson. Info and registration can be found on our website at sandiegoarchaeology.org. Tonight, we are using the Q&A feature, and you can find that on your Zoom control panel. Feel free to submit questions at any time. However, we will be answering it at the end of the presentation during a moderated Q&A. I am very pleased to introduce Dr. Mark Sutton, who's been doing archaeology all the way since high school. He has since worked for the U.S. Air Force, BLM, various private consulting firms, and taught at a number of community colleges and universities, including CSU Bakersfield, and he now teaches at the University of San Diego. Dr. Sutton has published numerous books and articles and served as the editor of the Journal of California in Great Basin Anthropology. He has worked at more than 150 archaeological sites in Western North America through his many years of investigating hunter-gatherer adaptations to arid environments, prehistoric diet and technology, and the prehistory of California. So without further ado, I would love to turn it over to Dr. Mark Sutton. Welcome.
Thank you very much. So tonight I was going to talk to you about one of the major questions in archaeology, and that is how and when did people originally inhabit the New World or the Americas? So I'll just take you through quickly the major questions. First of all, peopling of the New World. Three major questions. Where did the initial people in the Americas come from? Secondly, when did they first arrive? And thirdly, how did they get here? There are several possibilities that have been proposed. One of them is from Southeast Asia. If you can follow my cursor here, it would be a sea route into the far southern portion of South America. Another one is from Western Europe, a sea route again from Iberia across the North Atlantic. And the third one is from Northeastern Asia. So either along the coast, either in boats or on foot, or by foot into central Alaska, and then through what is known as the ice-free corridor. Those are the three major possibilities that have been put out there. I keep getting the Southeast Asian idea has very little evidentiary support. It's just more of a speculative idea. I'm just not really aware that anybody really thinks that this is even a good idea. The second one from Western Europe, or the so-called Solutrean solution, also has very little evidentiary support, but it has a little more. There's a teeny bit of support for it. This has been, there's been books, a number of articles published on this. There's ideas about some DNA from Europe. There's ideas about blades that look like the Upper Paleolithic Solutrean from Iberia. The problems with it is that there is basically an insurmountable issue about how they could have gotten here. They would have to have gone across the North Atlantic at the height of the Ice Age, and there's simply no solid evidence that there was a technical capability of doing that, or that there was any ability to subsist on the way. And there's also kind of this idea that Native Americans have this European origin, and there's a little bit of a racist tinge to that. But it just doesn't have a lot of support. The origin in Northwestern Asia, however, has a great deal of support. So you would then have Northwest Asia linked to North America through what is called the land bridge, or Beringia. And this has a great deal. Let me go forward and show you Beringia here. This has a great deal of support. So the the white areas are ice. So you can see that the ice sheets in North America are very large and very extensive. And yes, there are ice sheets elsewhere, but they're not blocking really anything. And so at the height of the glaciation, you would have sea level drop ballpark 300 feet, maybe 350, somewhere in there. And that would then expose the Bering Strait land bridge, currently underwater in what's called the Bering Sea. And so this would all be exposed, linking then Northeast Asia and Northwest North America. So at the height of the glaciation, Northwestern Asia would be relatively open, Beringia would be open, and most of Alaska would be open and available for people to move across and inhabit. You would also then have the coastlines here, following here, that were also available to transit. As you can see from the illustration here, you reach the point where it becomes very difficult on foot, you would think, to traverse this area here, because the ice, at least in many places, went right down to the ocean. So the evidentiary support for the Northwest Asian origin includes biological anthropology, particularly the genetics. The DNA links Northwest Asian populations to Native American populations. There's a little bit of play about Southeast Asian populations, and that's where the actual idea from the southern into southern South America comes through, but that really doesn't work very well. So the DNA is pretty solid. There's also physical type, dental information, blood types that that support a Northeast Asian origin for Native peoples. The linguistics is also very strong. The linkages of languages suggest an origin in Northeast Asia. And then, of course, there's the archaeology. The archaeology does not support. I would imagine that the people who believe the Solutrean idea would offer other ideas, but I would argue that the archaeology does not support that, nor does it support anything in South America from Oceania. Everything that we know about, really, almost everything, links archaeologically Northeast Asia to people coming across into Beringia at a relatively early time. So we're going to then ignore Southeastern Asia and Western Europe and focus on then Northwestern Asia. So again, this is Beringia. You can see that in reality, North America is down here south of the ice. Alaska would be technically actually just part of Northeast Asia. So people in this area could almost literally just walk across and inhabit this area, which they did. But they could also then go along the coast if they chose to. So when did people come across? This is not at all clear. This is one of the major issues. For a long time, it was believed that the Clovis people were the first inhabitants of the New World, and that was so-called Clovis first model. And then in the late 70s, early early 80s, the Monteverde site in Chile in South America was accepted as being a pre-Clovis site. And if that were the case, then Clovis must, or people must have been here earlier than Clovis. That put a serious dent in the Clovis first model, as you might imagine. But you only had really one site, and it was just kind of still up in the air. Then the Paisley Cave site in Oregon came back at 14.5. Cooper's Ferry is pretty brand new at about 16,000. Friedkin site in Texas is about 15.5. Page Ladson site in Florida is about 14.5. So now there's a growing body of evidence suggesting that North America was inhabited clearly before Clovis times, and that pretty much puts an end to the Clovis first idea, but we'll come back to that in a little while. So if that's the case, if people are in Texas at 15.5, and if they're in Idaho at 16, people must have gotten south of the ice maybe by 17, 16.5, maybe 18, somewhere in there. We really don't know. So we're just speculating based on the idea that they have to have been there already to have inhabited Cooper's Ferry or Paisley Cave or Friedkin. There are assorted claims of an earlier presence like the Calico Early Man site, or there's a variety of other sites. Those are still, Calico was dated at 220,000 years. There's very little actual archaeological support for that. And there's not very much support for any of the other very early ideas yet either. Now, could that change? Yes, it could change, but this is what we know now. So here's where the Cooper's Ferry site is located, and you can see the ice and the lake systems at that time. And this is where the Paisley Cave site is located in Oregon. This is in Idaho, and this is in Oregon, and this is generally where these areas are in North America. So you can see that they're not that far away from the coast, and they're just south of the ice. So that's, if people are coming down the coast at 17 or something, one would expect to find the earliest evidence of occupation in the Pacific Northwest, and we do have that, at least so far. So the two possible routes from Asia are an ice-free corridor between the melting ice sheets, the two ice sheets that meet in just on the other side of British Columbia, but it's not clear when that was opened. So the ice sheets would have to have started melting, and a corridor between those two major glaciers would have to open. Then the land would have to then be inhabited by plants and animals to support people, and then people presumably in central Alaska would then move south through that corridor into North America. It's a viable idea, but there's really serious questions about when the ice-free corridor was open. And it seems that it's probably too late. It may have been open at 13, maybe a teeny bit earlier, somewhere in there, something like that. But if we have people already south at 16, then that is not the route that the original people came through. There's other data that suggests that people and animals actually moved north through that corridor later in time and into Alaska. So that leaves us with the coastal route, south from Beringia along the coast. This route would have always been open because there's water there. You can, if you have a boat or something like that, you could go that way. Although there may have been instances of open coastal terrestrial land there, so it wouldn't necessarily have to be a completely seafaring type thing. And this is currently the preferred route. This is what most people, as far as I can tell, what most people believe, that people first entered the New World along the coast of northwestern North America from Beringia. And so here's the idea of you can, on foot, you can come through an ice-free corridor and then into North America, or you can come along the coast and you get just south of the ice and go inland where Paisley Caves and Cooper's Ferry are, and then further south along the coast, ultimately, of course, into far South America. And it would take a little while to get there. Probably less time than one might think, but still a little while. I've lost my cursor. There you are. So moving south along the coast, there are issues including what are you going to eat? How are you going to get there? What were the major subsistence resources? Are there terrestrial plants and animals? Are there marine plants and animals? How did people move? What were the difficulties? Did they move on foot? What kind of obstacles might the ice might be like a major obstacle? Large rivers, perhaps. They could have moved by boat. But what is the evidence for boats? Actually, at this moment, or at least until very near this moment, the idea that people move south along the coast using seaworthy boats is kind of the predominant model at this point in time. In support of that model, there's what's called the Kelp Highway hypothesis or model. And this proposes that people utilize the resources of the offshore kelp beds that run along the North Pacific Rim from Japan to Baja California. Now this would, the kelp highway would include a very large number of resources. There's all kinds of fish, there's kelp, there's birds, there's sea mammals, there's shellfish, there's you name it. This is a very productive environment. And you can see that this is the worldwide distribution of kelp. So if you start in Japan, it goes all the way along the Pacific coast, all the way down to Baja California. So it makes sense that if you are moving along the coast, this would be a reasonable and available resource base for you to use. But what would be the ability to actually obtain those resources? Are you able to enter the water to get kelp? Are you able to dive to get abalone? Are you able to hunt from boats to get sea mammals? Those kinds of things. And what is the evidence for that? So in this model, Paleoindians are seen as seafaring and using seaworthy boats to access the kelp beds and the islands offshore and to circumvent obstacles like where the glaciers meet the ocean and large rivers and things like that. This does not seem unreasonable in the kelp highway model. It seems reasonable, and this for a decade or more, maybe 2 decades, was kind of the predominant model. The kelp forest distribution, resources. But what is the evidence for seafaring Paleoindians and seaworthy boats? Well, the idea is that the boats were needed to help access the kelp, but there's actually very little evidence of the use of the kelp beds. Admittedly, there's very little evidence of anything, but there's very little evidence of the use of the kelp beds. It was suggested that boats were needed to circumvent obstacles such as large river mouths and glaciers blocking travel on foot. Fair enough. Do you need seaworthy boats to do that, or would a raft do? It was also suggested, and I think this is one of the prime arguments for seafaring Paleoindians and seaworthy boats, was that it was suggested that this was needed to access offshore islands. The offshore islands that are typically cited as examples of the requirement for boats are the Northern Channel Islands in California. So the Northern Channel Islands are San Miguel, Santa Rosa, Santa Cruz, and Anacapa, and they're, what are they? Now I can't remember, 20 miles or so offshore. Certainly you can't swim there. This is a relatively, once you get north of Point Conception, the ocean changes. It's not something that you take lightly with a I mean, you have to pay attention to the ocean to get to the islands and whatnot. So it doesn't, on its face, it doesn't seem unreasonable that you would need some sort of reasonable boat to get there. But this is also at a time when the sea levels were lower. At a time when the sea levels were lower, those 4 Channel Islands form a single island called Santa Rosa, and with the sea levels being lower, there's actually only about a 7 or maybe 8 kilometer, maybe 5 mile, 6 miles, something like that distance between the mainland and the island. So then the question is, in my mind at least, do you need an actual seaworthy boat to get to the Northern Channel Islands, or that one Northern Channel Island, Santa Rosa? And I find that difficult to accept. The island was inhabited by at least 13,000 years ago. There's a human skeleton, or a partial human skeleton, that is dated to 13,000 there. That is pretty unequivocal evidence of the presence of humans at that time. So the question is, how did that person get there? Did they need a seaworthy boat? Did they have seaworthy boats? This doesn't really answer the question, but if people had boats at 13,000 years ago to get to Santa Rosa, they should also have gone to the other Channel Islands, all visible from each other. So wherever you're standing, pretty much wherever you're standing in the Channel Islands, you can see the other Channel Islands. Maybe not all of them at the same time, but you can see Santa Catalina from the mainland. You can see San Nicolas from Santa Catalina. You can see San Clemente from Santa Catalina. You can see Santa Catalina from Santa Cruz. So there's visual, you're not going out into unknown waters. There's a visual thing. So if people are on the Northern Channel Islands at 13, and if they had seaworthy boats, one would expect that they would also be on the Southern Channel Islands. But they're not. The Southern Channel Islands were not occupied until about 10,000 years ago. And that suggests to me that seaworthy boats were not present until then. If they had them before, they would have gone, one would think, to the Southern Channel Islands. Now, is it possible that there's earlier sites there we haven't found? Sure, anything's possible, but with current evidence, the earliest that we know of in the Southern Channel Islands and on San Clemente is at the Eel Point site, which is about 10,000 years old. And there's a boat repair kit that has been found there, or artifacts interpreted as a boat repair kit. So if boats were not present until about 10,000 years ago, they would not have been part of the initial Paleo-Indian technology at 17 or 18,000 years ago, is my argument. So I would argue that there aren't boats. People did not originally come to the New World as seafaring Paleo-Indians with seaworthy boats. So if that's not the case, how did they get there? And this is where we get, oh, what am I doing? I'm going the wrong way is what I'm doing. To a different model. Salmon. So when I first thought of this, it just popped into my head, the fishing link. And when I was discussing this with the editor of the publication that ultimately published this paper, I said, that's just a joke. We'll come up with another. And he said, no, I really like that. So we kept that. So it's the fishing link instead of the missing link, but with fish. Anyway, so salmon are found all along the coastal route, just like the kelp beds are, from northeastern Asia, all along Beringia, the south on the coast south to Baja California, and they've been there a long time, millions of years. There's 7 species along the northwest coast of North America. So here's a distribution, or a map of the distribution of salmon in the North Pacific, and you can see they're all over Alaska. They're well into pardon me, Northeast Asia. They're all along the coast, all the way down. Salmon used to be in the Los Angeles River, used to be is the operative word, used to be a lot of places that they're not anymore, but that's only recent. And here's 5 of the species. These are big animals. Yeah, these are big packages of food. So salmon, it kind of like seems obvious that salmon would be a magnet resource, and yet nobody thought of this before, or nobody published on it before. Salmon, and I don't really understand why, although I do have an idea. Salmon are the species that hatch in fresh water. They swim to the ocean to mature, then return to their birthplace to spawn, which are known as the famous salmon runs. However, about 3 to 5% of the salmon get lost. So they don't go back up their home stream, as we've been taught that salmon do that. And most of them do, but not all of them do. 3 to 5% of them get lost and will just go up any water course and will then establish new colonies. And this will happen very quickly. So as the ice begins to retreat, with the last glacial maximum, let's say it's at 18, 19 somewhere, the ice then starts to retreat. And as it does, it creates then all of these probably thousands of little waterways, some of them coalescing into larger ones and into rivers and whatnot. But even as the ice retreats just a couple of miles, just a little bit, salmon will actually colonize those brand new streams, and they will do it very quickly, within a decade. There have been studies done about salmon colonizing brand new streams that as the climate warm, we're in climate change right now, so the ice is retreating, and biologists are studying this. And so the ice that is retreating from current glaciers that were at the ocean, they are forming these new little water courses, and within 10 years these things are full of salmon. So this is not a long process. And I think that nobody really realized how fast this actually happened. So in people's minds, and I'm speculating here, this is what I think that people thought that it would take thousands of years to reestablish those coastal biomes to where salmon would be viable resources. And so they didn't really consider them as major resources used by Paleoindians. But this happens literally within 10 years. It's very, very quick. And the reason that I realized this is that a friend of mine is a fisherman, and he goes all over the world fishing. And he went to South America, and he was fishing for salmon. And I like, salmon? There's salmon in South America, really? He said, oh yeah, they stock it, they colonize it. It just a few years they colonize it. And that's kind of like where the light bulb went off. And that's where this basically originated. So as the ice retreated, so the model goes, a large number of streams and rivers by these were newly colonized by salmon. These new salmon habitats or patches, I mean, they might be a mile apart or 2 miles apart, would have become attractants or magnets for people to move to them. Thus, people would have been drawn south from watercourse to watercourse, moving primarily on foot. Coastal obstacles could have been bypassed using simple watercraft such as rafts. No need for seagoing boats or seafaring Paleoindians. They could have just walked down there, and yes, they would have encountered obstacles that would have required watercraft, but rafts would have done the trick easily. Once people reached the mainland south of the ice, they encountered the Columbia River system, the mother lode for salmon, and some followed it inland while others continued south. And so we see then this, whoops, press the wrong button. So we see this movement of people into the Pacific Northwest, and you can see that at Cooper's Ferry and at the other site. So the idea is that you have people moving into following salmon, of course, up the Yukon and the Tanana rivers and whatnot, into central Alaska at 515. They're coming down the coast here, and this is a little inset to where they would go to this stream and then to that stream and to that stream and et cetera, all the way down the coast till they got south of the ice. This says 15. This paper was published a couple of years ago. Now I think it's more like 17, but those numbers are guesses. So this is kind of the model of how people would have gotten to the area. And there's evidence, of course, of early salmon use. Not a lot, but in Northwest Asia, there's evidence of there were fish present or salmon present at Ushki, and there are large fish remains there, but they've never been identified as species. So I'm speculating that they're salmon, but we don't know for sure. In central Alaska, there's a number of sites in the Tanana River Valley that do have salmon remains. British Columbia, On Your Knees Cave, there's a human burial with maritime isotopic signature that's not necessarily salmon, but probably. Same thing at Namu. In northwestern US, the Buell burial at 12.5 has an isotopic signature that matches salmon. Alternatively, the Anzac burial at 12.9 has an isotopic signature consistent with mammoths rather than fish, but that's a separate thing. There was lots of Clovis material found with that Anzac burial. Now, admittedly, a lot of the sites that one might expect to find these kinds of data in are probably underwater. If people are traveling the coastal route 17,000 years ago, when sea level is 300 feet lower, that's where the sites are probably, if there are sites, that's where they are. And so we don't have that many of them. There's been isotopic rebound or isostatic rebound in British Columbia. So there are actually Pleistocene sites that are above sea level right now. Some of those are 14,000 years old. So we're getting there. Thus, the salmon model provides a simple mechanism to give you the idea of how people would have moved from Northeast Asia along the coast and south into the Americas. It does not require any specialized seafaring watercraft technology. It doesn't require Clovis points. It just requires people fishing like they had probably been doing for a very long time. It does not require time for the formation of exploitable terrestrial ecozones along the coast, because those would have formed, at least the salmon ones, would have formed very, very quickly, very quickly. It does not negate the kelp highway model, but actually augments it. There's nothing that says that people couldn't have taken a raft out and gotten some kelp every once in a while or done some fishing or something like that. That doesn't negate it, it just augments it. So that brings me then to another point, and it's so on the premise that people were in the Americas as early as about 1716 at Cooper's Ferry. This means that the Clovis first model is basically disproven. Clovis appears about 13.1 thousand years ago and lasts for only 400 or 500 years, and then it's gone. It seems to have had a focus on mammoths. So there is a linkage between Clovis and mammoths. Now, there are lots of Clovis sites where there aren't mammoths, but all of the mammoth kill sites are of Clovis age, and some, not all, have Clovis points. Interestingly, there is very little evidence of a pre-Clovis use of mammoths. So if we accept the idea that people are here at 16, let's say, and Clovis isn't here until 13, you've got 3,000 years, let's say, of pre-Clovis people living with mammoths, but not using them. Well, then at about 13, where Clovis suddenly appears and people are suddenly using mammoths. So there's a sudden focus on mammoths, coincident with the appearance of a Clovis pattern. I find that very interesting. So I would suggest that instead of Clovis being an actual culture of like people, it's perhaps a ritual system designed to exploit mammoths used by other people that were already there. So they developed, the idea is, they developed Clovis as a ritual system, that it is not an actual group of people with an actual Clovis culture per se. You have the pre-Clovis people having some sort of a relationship with the mammoths amongst them. People always have a relationship with animals. They're either prey or they're pets or they're non-existent to the humans. So this is an ontological relationship of some sort. These animals would be very, very large. They would be in social groups. There would be parallels between mammoth societies, if you will, and human societies. And they had some sort of a non-aggression pact of some sort, it seems, in pre-Clovis times. And then suddenly that changed. Why did that change? What happened that suddenly you then have people hunting mammoths? I don't have an answer to that, to the why, but it does appear that it did change. Clovis consists of a unique and specialized technology. There are patterns of kill sites, caches, the use of ochre, ritual locations. Sometimes these caches are on volcanic tepras. There's a paucity of other site types such as camps. We don't know much, or there's not very much about a Clovis settlement system per se. It's a specialized thing. And then Clovis disappears as mammoths disappear. But fluted technology spreads across North and Central America, but not into South America. So this brings up then the question of what is Clovis and how does that relate to the people that were first in the Americas? Food for thought.
All right, thank you, Dr. Sutton. My name is Dante Beringia, and I'm the Development and Marketing Director at the San Diego Archaeological Center, and I will be moderating tonight's Q&A. As a reminder, you can submit questions using the Q&A feature on your Zoom control panel, and we will try to answer as many questions as possible. Let's see. You mentioned that you had an idea why other archaeologists had not studied or published on the salmon link. Can you expand on why not?
Well, my thinking was that people were thinking, my thinking is that they were thinking that it would take a great deal of time for terrestrial-based, including salmon, terrestrial-based resources to reestablish themselves along a coastal route once the ice had begun to retreat. And so I think that people really didn't really consider it because it's, well, that's going to take way too long. But then discovered that salmon will, within 10 years, occupy these ecozones. And so that became a non-issue. And I think that's why.
Have any middens been found along the coast?
Yes, there have been, but not very many because sea level rise has inundated the bulk of the evidence. But like I said, that there are some places along the coast of British Columbia that have that are still above sea level because of isostatic rebound. Once the ice melts, the pressure is taken off the land, and then the land rebounds and rises. So there are a few places where there are sites that date to the Ice Age times. And a few of them have actually been investigated, and they are finding there are dates in the 14,000 range, as I understand it. There's a lot more that can be done on this. There's only a few people working on it, and that's a tough place to work and whatnot. But I think probably most of the actual evidence, assuming it exists, would be underwater right now. But there are people looking underwater, and they have found sites underwater. They haven't really done much to investigate them because of the difficulty and the logistics of doing that. But there's hope.
Salmon runs are very seasonal. Wouldn't that limit the rate of migration?
It might. They're seasonal, but they're the different species run at different times and different years. So typically you're looking at a fall, but I think there are some spring salmon runs. Typically the larger salmon are in the fall, but I mean, we're not talking about waiting 20 years between salmon runs. We're talking about waiting, 1 year perhaps. So let's say that you utilize salmon on stream X, and then you move south 1 mile to the next stream and use that, and then the next year you move south. Well, in 800 years you're going to be in Oregon.
Is there archaeological evidence of a connection between humans and pygmy mammoths on the Channel Islands?
Not to my knowledge. There was early on some thought that humans were hunting those pygmy mammoths at something like 35 or 40,000 years ago. To my knowledge, that has never been substantiated.
Could steelhead also have been utilized along with salmon?
Yes, steelhead and other trouts would also be there. All of those are salmonids, and they would have been utilized throughout the river systems in the Pacific Northwest and in California.
Are salmon the only link you found, or are other species suspected to be equally drawn to humans, like abalone or other species that could have been eaten along the coast?
Certainly, there would have been a variety of other resources. I don't know about terrestrial mammals, how long, for example, bears and deer would take to recolonize that coastal zone. I would expect that things like shellfish would do that very rapidly, but I did not specifically investigate that, and so I don't really know the timing, other than I would imagine that would be very quick. Salmon, there have been, as I said, a number of studies done on contemporary brand new streams from ice retreats, and how long and what kinds of salmon, and that's what I've looked at.
What types of tools would you find at sites in order to substantiate this theory?
Well, yes, we're probably dealing with a relatively, I have to think of the word here. I'm old, it's hard for me now. Swiss Army knife-like technology, things that can, just little knives and blades. You don't, to actually catch salmon, you could use a variety of techniques, including weirs and nets. You could use the spears that have multiple hooks on them. So you might find then some the barbs on those Leicester spears would probably not be wood. They might preserve, but a lot of the tools that would be used to procure salmon would be perishable. What you would find, what I would expect to find, would be tools for the preparation rather than necessarily the capture, but the preparation of salmon. And then you would expect you could get wear patterns perhaps, or protein residue or DNA. And those studies, to my knowledge, have not been done, but are possible to do.
Why do some archaeologists insist that people paused in Beringia far to the north and waited for the ice to retreat? If people were already island hopping all the way from Japan up to the Kuril Islands 16 or 17,000 years ago, why wouldn't they have just continued along the Aleutian chain?
Well, I think that there's a good possibility that they did. But again, there's a lot of the Aleutian chain that's now underwater. So the bottom line is that we don't know.
How far south do you think the salmon would have run up streams along the Pacific coast, and up until when? Susie Arter at the NAT said she is not seeing salmon remains in early Holocene sites in Southern California.
Yes, I know that there's also a lack of salmon remains in the interior San Joaquin Valley, which is a little puzzling. So because it is salmon habitat, my understanding that there are historical records of salmon in the Los Angeles River system. But yes, I do know that there's a lack of salmon remains in some of these sites, and I don't know why.
And one of your previous colleagues from UCR, Bonnie Bade, said, what is your take on the site at Route 52 that has been published to date to about 115,000 years ago?
So she's talking about the Sereti Mammoth site. The claim was, yeah, about 130,000 years ago. I personally do not agree with that. I've actually published a paper about that. We actually did look at, ever so briefly, but nevertheless did look at that material. And we did not see any real reason to think that it was cultural. We thought that mastodon behavior could explain some of the breakage and some of the location of some of the bones and the green breaks and things like that, because we do know that elephants in general pay attention to their dead and actually interact with them to some degree.
Are you aware of the archaeological work being done at Chiquihita Cave in Mexico, dated to 25,000 to 30,000 years ago? The site is located at 2,740 meters above sea level in the Astiro Mountains.
I have heard of that site, but I don't know very much about it. I did not know that it had 30,000-year-old dates. So I don't know where that's, what the origin of those dates are.
And we have someone else who is aware of a approximately 10,000-year-old site at the Dalles that was excavated during construction of I-84 in the 60s and had a ton of salmon bone in it. Are there other old sites in these major river valleys with salmon remains? Cooper's Ferry apparently doesn't have salmon.
Yeah, I do know about the site at the Dalles, and there are several other sites in that area that do have salmon remains that are in the neighborhood 10, 11, 12, maybe not 12, 10 and 11. And of course, if you want me to recite the names, I can't remember them off the top of my head. So, but yes, I do know about those, and yes, there's more than one.
Okay. And then we have a question, I'm not sure what this is about, but I'll ask it, from Paul Chase. Did they have Toyota pickup trucks? A vast theory of yours?
With big tires, they could go anywhere. Yes. And there was always candy in the glove box.
All right. Would the Japanese tapeworm, which is common in Pacific salmon, be present in these salmon populations? And if so, how would that play into the preparation of salmon?
I don't know the answer to that.
And okay. Any thoughts on the evolution of salmon from prehistoric times to now?
I know that everything evolves, and I know that there were different sizes of salmon in the past. Past that, I'm vaguely aware of it, and that's about all I can say. They've been around for a long time. There's paleontological evidence of salmon in that region for millions of years, so they've been around a long time.
Okay, well, I'm not seeing any more questions, so if anyone has a last minute question, please go ahead and submit it now. Otherwise, thank you so much, Dr. Sutton, for presenting your theory, and thank you to everyone for attending tonight's living room lecture. Our series continues in May with hominins, hyenas, and lions. For more information on these and other upcoming events, please visit sandiegoarchaeology.org. Oh, we just got one more question in. Someone wants to know what an isotopic signature is.
So an isotope is a variation of an atom. So different, like carbon-14 is an isotope of carbon, and there's carbon-13 and carbon-12. Well, lots of these elements have isotopes, and by measuring the strength of an isotope X versus an isotope Y, you can then deduce the kinds of foods, in a broad sense, the kinds of foods that were eaten, or the water temperature with oxygen isotopes, or if you're looking at strontium isotopes, you can then deduce mobility during a person's lifetime. There's a great deal you can do with isotopes. It's not limited to diet, but what I was talking about was dietary.
Okay. And someone asked, where's your paper published?
The salmon paper is in Paleoamerica, and the boats paper, which came out a year later, is also in Paleoamerica.
Okay. And we also have a comment saying pre-Clovis sites are well documented, but not common. Let's see, and no mammoths have been associated with pre-Clovis. All right, one more question. Would you encourage salmon repopulation in the present Channel Islands?
Oh, I don't know anything about that. I don't know if Channel Islands have ever had salmon population. The islands themselves, I don't know.
All right, well, I think that is all our questions. So once again, thank you so much. Thank you to everyone who attended. And don't forget to check our website, sandiegoarchaeology.org, for more information on upcoming events. Thank you and good night.
Thank you.